Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. I'm so happy to see so many of you join us a little even before time, which just goes to show how important discussions around voluntary carbon markets is going to be the topic for today is important. So welcome, and I'm so grateful to having all of you here for the second webinar in the Sustainable Action Dialogue series, which is being hosted by the Institute of Sustainability Studies. My name is Nazia Hussain. I'm the product manager at ISS. The brainchild basically behind running these webinars was with that objective to basically help remove the jargon that's often associated with sustainability topics and hold focused discussions on content that can really help businesses and individuals realign commitment with action. So today we are actually very delighted to have all of you present for an exclusive webinar on voluntary carbon markets, a critical piece of the net zero puzzle, being delivered by Javier Santoyo, policy advocate at the OpenAir Collective. Javier has over 15 years of experience in sustainability and ESG, working with global and Fortune 500 companies to develop and implement business transformation strategies that are rooted in sustainability. So we're delighted to have him join us and are looking forward to his insights. But before I invite Javier to speak with us, I'd just like to let everyone know that you'll find the Q&A dialog box at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to use it to drop any questions, comments, insights that you may have on this topic, and I'll get Javier to respond to all of that towards the latter half of this webinar. So we'll get started, and Javier, over to you.
Hi, Nasia, and everyone else, and thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope I can live up to the expectations created by your introduction. You're very kind. Yeah, you can please go to the next slide. We are going to be talking. This is the brief agenda. We're going to be talking about a tiny bit about me and what is the challenge of the science, what is the context behind the need for the voluntary carbon markets, why it is a critical part of the net zero puzzle. Although I leave that as a question mark, I leave up to you to decide in the end. And also, and more importantly, we are going to use a real world case study, which is the best way to see how this type of climate action can work in practice. So please, you can go to the next slide and next again. So I have almost 20 years of experience in with global 500, Fortune 500 companies, and many in areas related to strategy, management, consultancy, but all different areas of sustainability, including the social side of sustainability. However, since 2015, since the Paris Agreement, I've been focusing more on climate, and within climate on climate finance, and the voluntary carbon markets as an instrument of that. My goal for this webinar is for those of you who are confused about the conflicting messages on the specialized or general media about things like offsetting, carbon markets, biodiversity, climate and nature action, carbon pricing, and similar. You might have read or heard negative comments or very positive. So I like everyone to walk away with an understanding of what it is and what it isn't, according to the latest development and according to the latest science. And more importantly, how, if it is used properly, but I leave that up to you to decide, if it's used properly, for you to see that it is an essential tool to mobilize finance to combat climate change and biodiversity loss. So you can walk away and feel confident using it with your businesses, using it actively to achieve the nature positive and net zero goals that you developed. And to that effect, as I said, I'm going to use a real world case study. You can move to the next slide, please, and to the next. So first, I want to be very clear on this. Offsetting, or the use of carbon credits to offset, is definitely not decarbonization within one's value chain, and it is not adaptation. So when we think about the voluntary carbon markets, the first thing that comes to our mind is the word of offsetting. But neither that is their only use, nor it can be a substitute for the urgent things we need to do. Also, it is not one thing or the other. It is both. We need every available tool in the fight against climate change. We need to radically reduce or abate emissions. At the same time, we scale up sequestration and removal of greenhouse gas emissions. That excess of greenhouse gas emissions that is been accumulating since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So, and we continue to meet that. So also we need to differentiate between carbon credits, which is the unit, and offsetting, which is an action. But carbon credits can be used not only for offsetting, can be used for other things. And this is key, as we see in the next few minutes. Also, before we move to the next slide, I want to clarify as well that one concept that this is related to nature and biodiversity loss. During this webinar, I'm going to be talking sometimes about the biodiversity crisis as we do about the climate crisis, and imply that there are voluntary biodiversity markets, the same as there are carbon ones. But the truth is that there is no biodiversity market yet. But as we speak in 2023, these are being developed. And more importantly, we are learning from the mistakes of the carbon markets over the past 20 years. And this is because both crises are urgent. So we need to tackle both in synchrony. And to do so, we need to mobilize finance towards the nature protection and restoration as well. So just to keep that in mind. You can move to the next slide, please, Nasia. So clearly and very briefly, we are not on the right pathway. So ultimately, that is the issue. So we need to use every possible tool at our disposal. I'm not going to dwell too much on this slide because most of you are painfully aware what this means. It means that if we continue the way we are doomed, basically. We need both radical decarbonization and still we are reaching tipping points that we were not supposed to reach until 1.5, and we are 1.2, although last July, I was reading just yesterday that it is in line with that 1.5 scenario, like the temperatures we had last July globally. But so we need to remove that excess of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. At the same time, we do radical decarbonization. You can move to the next slide, please. So, and even if we decarbonize radically on the way to net zero, we need to outside the company's value chain, we also need to take mitigation strategies. At the same time, what they're with the latest science is telling us, there aren't at the moment any single pathways that they not involve carbon dioxide removals at a global at a big scale to keep the 1.5 target alive. We can move to the next slide, please. And this is really, really important because every fraction of a degree hugely matters. So the planet, even if we stop emitting today, tomorrow the planet is going to continue warming because that excess of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So we need to scale up mobilizing the finance to reduce carbon project and the sequester and remove. And I'm using sequester and remove indistinctly at the moment, but I'll clarify in the next few slides. Please, can you move to the next slide? And this is very important as well. It's not only about the science, and it's not also a question of survival for us. We need, there's a social dimension here. It's a wider society problem. On the one hand, these hard to abate emissions are the ones that are in the atmosphere that are the result of the developed countries' industrialization, which developing countries they have not contributed to. Also, these hard to abate emissions, and I'm talking here, for example, aviation, are more associated to our lifestyles. So certain key industries that generate hard-to-abate emissions, such as aviation, heavy industries, mining, are still in high proportion linked to developed countries' lifestyles. Also, those legacy emissions raise questions about accountability. So developed countries, as we are responsible for the insecure levels of greenhouse gases at the moment in the atmosphere, which in turn have a higher impact on developing countries. So we are doing it, but we don't suffer it as much. So, we see fires, we see issues related to a rapidly changing climate, but as you've seen around the world in other countries, that the impact of the changing climate is being brutal. Certain countries, as we are all aware, are in fact disappearing, like island nations. So these have all generated that debate about loss and damage, which probably you heard talking a lot about the compensation and loss and damage in the last COP, and it's going to be a key item on the agenda for the next COP. And what some academics, they talk about decolonization of the atmosphere. So we need to pay for the ones that they did the damage. We need, including historically, we need to pay for fixing that damage. So the most vulnerable, they don't suffer that. As the Indian Minister of Power of Energy put it in his own words, in order for others to have more space to develop, it's important that all developed countries talk not only about net zero, as we do all the time, but also about how to remove more carbon than they are adding. One thing coming to this point that I want to mention is that very recently, in the past few weeks, we've particularly there's been a debate in the Gulf states and in the UK about climate policy, and the Gulf states because, as you know, the next COP is going to take place in the Emirates, is the use of carbon capture and storage. Carbon capture and storage is something, is a topic for another full webinar, and I'm not going to dwell into detail, but I want to distinguish that anything I'm going to be talking about on the next few slides, it's nothing to do with carbon capture and storage. Carbon capture and storage is capturing the emissions at the point of source and then storing them. But that can be used as a license to continue burning fossil fuels. So I completely disagree with it, and unless it's in certain uses to capture the hard-to-abate emissions, to use them for other uses. But using it as an excuse to continue investing in fossil fuels is suicidal. And I cannot agree with that. If you can move to the next slide, please. So well, now we're going to talk about that was the background and how the voluntary carbon market that can be the part of the solution. We can move to the next slide, please, Nasia. So this is another variation of the graphs you might have already seen. So we have the business as usual. We have what is the net zero path consistent with a 1.5 warming scenario by 2050. And a very optimistic scenario that we continue decarbonizing the atmosphere. So not decarbonizing only within the value chains of our companies, of our organizations, but also the atmosphere, to continue moving towards negative emissions and even like go beyond the target goal of 2050. For that, we need climate finance. And the UN statements on climate change have been very clear. In fact, over the past year, they've been very, very clear. In the words of Antonio Guterres, even hyperbolic, because I believe he said, like, we are on a highway to climate hell, and that's where we are if we continue as business as usual. So it's clear that there is a gap between the results of our decarbonization efforts. In fact, we are failing miserably, most of the companies, and where we need to be. So all the UN IPCC models and the International Energy Association models, they already include the use of offsets beyond value chain mitigation offsets outside the value chain, but mainly removals at a massive scale from next decade. Because decarbonization within a company's value chain is not enough. Additionally, and I mentioned here biodiversity again, the UN Biodiversity Conference, the COP15, the last December within China and Montreal, highlighted the importance of tackling both interlinked crises together. And really, we cannot tackle one without the other. And I'm not talking only about nature-based solutions. In general, we cannot talk about one without the other, because life cannot thrive at the temperatures we're going to be reaching if we continue in business as usual. And that, of course, contributes to biodiversity loss. You can move to the next slide, please. So the main authority in climate. So when we talk about the climate behind the Paris Agreement, I don't want to bore you with acronyms, but if you can remember one acronym from this webinar, probably you already know about it, but it's the SBTi. The SBTi stands for the Science Based Target Initiative. Basically, they're a not-for-profit, and is the coordination between different organizations that they are created and since 2021, since 2018, they created guidelines for companies, a route for decarbonization for companies, which is called the science-based target. These are, when we talk about company decarbonization pathways, what really we mean is that a strategy for decarbonizing within the value chain. And then in October 2021, this SBTi launched the Corporate Net Zero Standard, which provides guidance, criteria, and recommendations for companies to set long-term climate targets consistent with a scenario that limit the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, with no or limited overshot around 2050. So this has the SBTi guidance at the moment, and the next slide I will show that it is also changing when it comes to the area of outside the value chain. At the moment, what it's saying is that companies that need near-term science-based targets, these are like 5 to 10 year targets to reduce emissions radically within the company value chain, in line with 1.5, and the long-term science-based target. These companies are required to reduce emissions within the company value chain in line with the 1.5 scenarios, which at the end date of 2050 or around 2045, 2050. And for most companies, what it means is 90% to 95% reductions. So that was the long-term target means. And then number 3 of the requirement, or the key element, is when talk about beyond value chain mitigation. This is the area with all the offsetting is, because this is what actions you take outside your value chain. So it's not decarbonization, it is a decarbonization or something, a reduction or sequestration that another company has done outside the value chain. This is where the SBTi guidance, at the moment, they're going through consultation to clarify how companies they can do. They don't want to call it offsetting, they call it beyond value chain mitigation, and how they can use climate finance for that, or the voluntary carbon markets. And then the last thing the last key element required by the SBTi is for that 5%, 10% of residual emissions, companies they need to neutralize them. And neutralize them means that they need to be compensated by permanent sequestration, which is what we call removals. Ultimately, the SBTi net zero standard recommends you to define your offsetting strategy, and that is when it's going to be clarified, to drive global climate ambition to reach the 1.5 goal, to provide the necessary green finance to enable development of emission reductions and removal projects, and also carbon projects that they have massive co-benefits in terms of social and other environmental impacts, and accelerate the development of climate solutions for cost-effective emissions and removals. So we need to keep in mind that also investing beyond your value chain is also helping other organizations and other companies in their own within value chain decarbonization efforts. You can move to the next slide, please. So keeping in mind what is the best practice at the moment and what I just mentioned, that is where that area beyond value chain mitigation is where the change is going to come from the SBTi. At the moment, we have, when we talk about the use of the voluntary carbon markets, organizations, we can divide them in three groups. The companies that are starting, which is the bare minimum, and they are doing very well. They are focusing on radical decarbonization, but they only do that, and it's brilliant. This is many companies, they haven't even started on this path yet, and this is the first thing and urgent. And then there are the ones that are following the guidance I've just mentioned. That is, they are improving. They are following strictly the SBTi current guidance, but that means that they might have not engaged in that value chain, beyond value chain mitigation. They are not doing offsetting, or they are not taking any action outside their value chain. And then the leading company, what they are doing now is, okay, we know that this SBTi is going in that direction. This is what we need to do. So we do rapid abatement of our emissions. And at the same time, I don't want to use this word a lot, but they go for carbon neutrality. Carbon neutrality only means that all those unabated emissions on the way to net zero, you neutralize them or compensate them or offset them with actions elsewhere. But that doesn't mean that you lose focus on your own decarbonization effort, that you contribute to that decarbonization of the atmosphere by taking immediate action or immediate carbon neutrality. You can move to the next slide, please. So as companies are moving that way, they're moving to the leading positions, and there is an urgency to act now. The problem is going to be that the voluntary carbon markets are voluntary, so they are not in a defined jurisdiction. They are global, so there is not a legal framework underpinning it. So the governance of these markets are voluntary, so are governed by market forces of supply and demand, but also by organizations that they're working very hard to keep integrity by ensuring that methodologies are science-based methodologies for the carbon project, and also standards that allow third-party verification of those carbon projects. But we have an issue of integrity and quality, and at the same time, we have a growing demand because companies are moving to leading positions. So the market is super scale at the moment. That's why the prices of the good quality carbon credits are going up, and they're even very difficult to find, even good quality carbon credits. And we need to put efforts using technology, for example, or data-driven innovation to ensure that the market can scale to deliver that climate action that companies are willing to support as well. So that the key challenges that determine the price are related to those elements I've briefly discussed. So there is the supply. In 2022, there was only 2 million credits. That is 1% of the global emissions. So you can do your own calculations on how many more credits and projects that they deliver them we need. Quality is still, because it's a voluntary carbon market, there are and not all credits are born the same. There are hundreds of different type of projects. I'll show a tiny bit more about that before in the next slides. There are a few more. There are different type of credits, and that means that the quality of measurement is easier to measure the quality of, for example, sequestration. You sequester a ton of carbon. is easier to prove than a reduction or an avoidance. So that's why the issue of quality is that's why there are many credits that are subject to criticism. And then risk, the higher the risk, obviously, the cheaper the carbon credits that are sold there in the market. So it is risk and price, they are very they are related. So to lower robust projects with that, they reduce the risk to the buyer and reduce the risk to the community where the projects are delivered, they command higher prices because of that. So general rules and a playing field for transparency and governance is key. So the good projects, they thrive, whereas the cheap offsets of those credits with very high risk, they start disappearing, or there isn't an incentive for them to continue. You can move to the next slide, please. So let's do a case study. As I mentioned, a real case study to see how we apply all this concept for a company. You can move to the next slide. We are talking here about it's a FTSE 100 company, and it's in the financial services, and it's a company it's a very recent case study that I've been involved with. The original ask, it was that they needed like a carbon offset sourcing and procurement strategy to achieve operational net zero. Operational net zero for this company, for other companies, what they mean is to achieve that carbon neutrality for scope 1 and 2 emissions. So the emissions that they're directly related to the organization, and some scope 3 categories that are related to the operations of the organization. So the offsetting volumes can vary year on year, depending on their emerging and acquisitions. So it is not a fixed amount. And also, of course, as they progress within the decarbonization efforts, those or a reduction in the size of their operations, or at the same time, or if they acquire another company, they can increase the size of those emissions. So that the offsetting volume or the need, they can vary over the years. So this plan as well can be used then to roll out the same approach for the scope 3 emissions for other parts of the business. They also have an internal price of carbon, which is helpful to determine what projects to choose. And they have a strategic interest on environmental co-benefits such as biodiversity, of course, and other social co-benefits that many carbon offsetting projects, like, for example, in the areas where they operate. And also they already have some experience in offsetting. They've done some offsetting for scope 2 emissions with the energy supplier, and they want to follow the best practice and guidance and the best the principles out there in the market. Some of them we've already discussed. Also, they understand that avoidance or reduction versus sequestration and removal is going to evolve over time as they get close to the net zero targets. You can move to the next slide, please. So in this case, what we would recommend then it is the best practice in a real case for this particular company, translating what we discussed in previous slides. For this particular company, it is basically what is represented in this graph. On the one hand, large abatement of emissions. This is the long and short term targets, or the science-based targets. Then having start modeling and having a calculation of what is going to be the residual emissions at net zero and on the way to net zero, to start looking for projects for permanent removal of those emissions, and at the same time take action on at the same volume at the same level as the unabated emissions of the way to net zero, take action outside their value chain, what the science-based target initiative called beyond value chain mitigation. So the application of that best practice for a company's climate strategy, the 1 and 2, that decarbonization is what we call the decarbonization strategy, of course. And then 4 and 3 is what we call the carbon offsetting strategy. You can move to the next slide, please. And how do we do this? Well, the first is to know your numbers, so understand your footprint. This company, they were very advanced with that. Of course, they've been reporting on climate for a long time. And also they were very advanced in the next and most important point, which is the decarbonization strategy. They already have the science-based targets endorsed by the Science-Based Target Initiative. So the next thing that they want to do, and that's why how I was helping them, is to develop that offsetting strategy, which is a multi-year strategy that can meet the needs that they have at the moment for that net zero operational target they have for 2025, and then plan the successful achievement of the targets in the future years. So short term, that to design a portfolio doing something similar to materiality assessment. So what is important to them? Design a portfolio of different projects that helps them to achieve the net zero operational target, but at the same time achieve their focus on those other co-benefits that we discussed they already have, or they're in the social and environmental dimension. And medium and long term, manage that portfolio, develop that pricing strategy to maintain that operational net zero, but also start planning for the offsetting needs towards the achievement of net zero, that neutralization credits they are going to need at net zero. And more importantly, start planning what the initial work for scope 1 and 2 in terms of offsetting, how that can be translated to the entire value chain. Because again, the lion's share of the emissions for most companies is going to be scope 3. To show you an example of a portfolio, when we talk about a portfolio of projects, you can please move to the next slide, Nasia. For them, for example, there was a short initial portfolio of projects in areas where they have operations, and also they meet those requirements of the type of carbon credit or type of project, and also the co-benefits. You can move to the next slide, please. And these are the type of projects we choose for them. Biochar in Wales, biochar. I don't think I have time to explain. We are towards the end of the webinar, but this is permanent removal, and it has a very long list of amazing co-benefits. Then afforestation or reforestation of native woodlands in a native forest in Scotland. We can move to the next slide, please. Then direct air capture, they wanted to invest as well in helping in new technologies that can help in removing carbon permanently as well. And then other type of afforestation in developed countries to contribute to that legacy emissions as well, and all these issues we talk about. And in this case, blue carbon or mangrove restoration in Mexico. So this is it from my side. I think I was going slightly over time, so we can revert to.
Perfect. No, thank you so much, Javier. I'm sure the participants have taken much value from your insights today. So I'll just open the Q&A. Please feel free to drop in any questions or comments that you may have on what you've heard from Javier today, and we'll get started on answering those questions. Just to actually get the ball rolling, I think I'd just like to understand from you, Javier, how do voluntary carbon markets sort of differ from the regulated carbon markets, and what are the sort of implications that organizations can consider when they're participating in voluntary carbon markets?
Yeah, well, the main thing, as I implied during the webinar, is that the voluntary carbon markets are voluntary, so they are not being the voluntary carbon markets are voluntary governance. They are not within a fixed jurisdiction. So the motivations for organizations is not regulatory or tax, like the compliance carbon markets. We have giant, for example, the European Union is a compliance carbon market of 270 billion. We haven't even mentioned that during the webinar. So, but the voluntary carbon market companies, and this is the interesting part, they participate voluntarily because there is a strategic gain, this is a strategic aim. I mean, I'm not talking about, of course, like it's completely opposite to greenwashing. In fact, some companies, they are very careful about how to engage with the voluntary carbon markets. And sometimes they don't even disclose that they're doing it, which we call the opposite to greenwashing. So yeah, the main, without going into detail or numbering them, the main driver is strategic, is purely business. And then within that, that would be a topic for a 3-hour webinar. So like the different motivations for companies to engage in the voluntary carbon market.
Yeah, sure. No, I understand that now. But do you think voluntary carbon markets can also incentivize sort of technology and innovation, and just perhaps move organizations towards more technological advancements, towards, of course, emission reduction? Do you think that can be an incentive?
And that is key in Asia, and that is the same as setting an internal price of carbon pricing. It is an incentive to decarbonize and as well to incentivize new technologies for decarbonization. In terms of the voluntary carbon market, in fact, originally, they were designed to mobilize finance and to move finance, to channel finance from developing countries, the ones that would cause the current situation, to from developed countries, excuse me, to developing countries to mobilize finance. So that's the original the original idea of climate finance, green finance. Now that is evolved now, and of course that's a very important reason for the carbon markets. But it is key now to drive new techniques. Even when we talk about nature-based solutions, with hugely advanced of how to do like a proper restoration or reforestation or biochar. So it is exactly what you mentioned is key for incentivizing the development of carbon offsetting projects that they can participate in or carbon projects can participate in the voluntary carbon markets. And yeah, that is the whole reason for climate finance, not only about compensation and loss damage and channel finance to where is most needed, but also to drive innovation.
Right, of course. We've got a question from Martha who's asking, do you know any company that has reached net zero?
Oh, there is I'm not going to mention it. So there's companies that claim net zero. I don't know whether probably most of the audience, they've seen that Microsoft, they claim net zero. There are companies that I'm aware. I don't want to name and shame here, but there are companies that they achieve net zero. We have to think like that standard of the net zero standard of the SBTi, which is like the gold standard, the best practice. It is only from October 2021. Companies apply that retrospectively, and some of them claim, oh, we've done all of this, we are net zero. Until the SBTi tells me this company has achieved net zero, I prefer not to get involved. But I believe, and I work with companies that they are net zero, and they are going beyond now. Even though they don't have the endorsement, they are working with the SBTi. And also the SBTi guidance is evolving as well. At the moment, they are engaged in this beyond value chain mitigation, which is bang on directly related to the voluntary carbon market. But even the standard to who is going to be, and I think also the SBTi at the moment is providing guidance. In the future, is going to become, okay, there's a lot of this, we provide guidance and we endorse, like if there are design is robust behind the science-based targets of a company, and the net zero claims of a company, they're robust. And then what they are, I think in the future, they're going to become a company that they will do like kind of like the auditing. They will say, oh, these companies are doing well, or these companies, they are failing miserably. So, and just to finish this answer, what I can tell you is that most companies are failing miserably. Even all these companies, they have the 3,000 or 4,000 companies already have science-based targets. It is very easy to set science-based targets, then mobilize internally the finance and take action. It's not that easy. And that's why it's even more important to use this tool of the climate finance to help internally and externally to help others.
True. I think that's the idea where transparency and accountability come in, just to ensure that the company does not sort of like go over the other side, which is very close to greenwashing and just, fudging numbers. So for sure. If there are any more questions, I'll give it another minute or so, but we do need to wrap up this session now. Just one last question. Actually, we had received this question from one of our participants who couldn't join us live, was how can organizations engage their stakeholders and communicate their participation in voluntary carbon markets? What are the reputational and marketing benefits associated with voluntary carbon markets for a business?
Well, are huge. I mean, it is I would say if we leave aside the new desperately needed, like the new technologies for carbon removal, proper CTR, carbon removal, and also carbon sequestration through restoration, most carbon projects, the ultimate goal to issue carbon credits is not to fund that climate action. These are charities or NGOs that they're using the finance for another social and environmental mission. For example, is about water stewardship, or about cleaning plastic, or about the indigenous communities, indigenous rights of running, being able to run a natural park, or provide women empowerment education or financial independence. So and all those co-benefits are really powerful tools for companies to advance on their holistic sustainability strategy. So the same as there are a tool for driving climate action in the right direction, these carbon projects and getting involved with them, supporting these carbon projects and their wider mission is a really powerful tool to advance on the overall sustainability strategy of organizations. And this company in particular that I use, Trial Case Study, is a clear example of that. They see the involvement in the voluntary carbon markets as something holistically, and then you do well, you communicate internally and externally. So that's why you look for carbon projects that they are when you do that materiality assessment, that they are directly linked to what your key stakeholders are, your own employees, your clients, the community you operate in, that they feel that this is more material to them, more important.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, I think we will wrap up now because we're a little over time, but I'll just like to add here quickly that if you want to learn more about voluntary carbon markets or decarbonization, please feel free to get in touch with us about our courses. We offer the length and breadth of sustainable business planning through our very comprehensive and foundational diploma in business sustainability course. We have 2 start dates for that coming up, which is the 20th of September and 26th of October. We're also holding an online information session on the 24th of August. So feel free to join in for that session and ask us any specific questions related to the course. We'll be happy to answer those for you. And thank you once again, Javier, for your time. I think the participants have taken much value from your insights today. So thank you so much. And just letting everyone know that we will be running these webinars and events very frequently. So keep a lookout on our LinkedIn and our website for our future events. So thank you so much for joining, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you, Javier.
Thank you, Nasia. Bye.